Adrian took a long drink of water. I'm donating it. Donating? To the Vale Foundation Housing Initiative. Naomi stared at him. That penthouse alone was worth nearly $12 million. Sir, the media will notice. Adrian wiped sweat from his forehead calmly. Good. Naomi hesitated. There's one more thing. She handed him the tablet. A news headline filled the screen. Mercy General under investigation after internal document leaks. Below it, a photo of Evelyn leaving the hospital at exactly 5 p.m. while reporters chased her with microphones. Another headline underneath. City's most famous surgeon refuses unpaid overtime. Adrian looked at the image a moment longer than necessary. Evelyn's face showed no panic, no guilt, just exhaustion sharpened into discipline. Interesting. Most people broke publicly once pressure intensified. She looked steadier under attack. Naomi studied him carefully. You know her? Not really. But Adrian handed back the tablet. She reminds me of someone who finally got tired of carrying idiots. Naomi almost laughed. Almost. Meanwhile, Mercy General had become a war zone. Every department overflowed with frustration. Surgery waitlists stretched for months. Doctors argued openly with administrators. Patients demanded refunds. And through all of it, Evelyn remained calm, which somehow made the executives even angrier. Inside conference room B, Director Lawson slammed a stack of papers onto the table. This is unacceptable. Evelyn sat across from him quietly sipping coffee. The contrast made him look even more unstable. You are refusing additional surgeries. My contract specifies workload limitations. You never cared before. That was my mistake. Lawson's jaw tightened. You're turning the staff against administration. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. No, your behavior is doing that. One administrator snapped. Patients are suffering because of you. For the first time, something cold entered Evelyn's expression. Patients suffered long before I started leaving on time. Silence. She leaned forward slightly. You ignored staffing shortages for years. Another administrator tried interrupting. You don't understand operational. No, Evelyn said calmly. You don't understand medicine. The room went still, because she was right. Most hospital executives hadn't touched a patient in decades, but they controlled budgets, schedules, staffing, and salaries. Lawson pointed angrily. You've become arrogant. Evelyn almost smiled. No, she stood slowly. I've become unavailable for exploitation. Then she walked out. One junior administrator whispered after the door closed. She talks to us like we're the enemy. Lawson stared at the door darkly. That's because she thinks she's untouchable. But deep down, he knew something terrifying. At this point, she almost was. That evening, heavy rain flooded downtown streets. Traffic crawled painfully. Ambulance sirens echoed constantly through the city. Inside Mercy General's emergency department, chaos exploded. A multi-vehicle bridge accident. 9 critical patients incoming. Blood shortages. 2 operating rooms already occupied. Doctors rushed through hallways shouting instructions. And then, the impossible happened. Dr. Samuel Pierce collapsed during surgery. Cardiac arrest. The only other surgeon capable of handling the incoming thoracic trauma cases? Evelyn Carter. Director Lawson immediately grabbed his phone. She needs to come back now. A nurse hesitated carefully. She already declined emergency overtime this week. Lawson exploded. People will die. The nurse looked exhausted. So will doctors eventually. But she still made the call. Across town, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment wearing loose gray sweats, halfway through cooking dinner. The sound of rain against the windows soothed her nerves. Her phone buzzed. Mercy General Hospital. She stared at it silently. It rang again, then again. Finally, she answered. The nurse's voice trembled. Dr. Carter, we need you. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Who's operating? Dr. Pierce collapsed. That changed things. Not administration. Not politics. Patients. Real patience. Evelyn leaned against the kitchen counter silently. For years, the hospital weaponized her conscience against her. They knew she cared too much to walk away, and she hated them for understanding that. The nurse whispered desperately, "There's a 16-year-old girl with a ruptured aorta." Evelyn's grip tightened slightly around the phone. Damn it. 5 minutes later, she grabbed her coat. At nearly the exact same moment, Adrian Vale's black sedan stopped beneath the Orion Financial Tower parking entrance. Floodwater covered half the street. His driver cursed quietly. Road closures everywhere tonight. Adrian checked his watch impatiently. Then movement caught his attention. Across the flooded intersection, a woman sprinted through the rain toward Mercy General. Dark coat, hair soaked, focused expression. Evelyn. For a split second, Adrian genuinely considered ignoring it. Then lightning flashed. A taxi nearly lost control turning through the flooded road. Evelyn stepped back sharply to avoid it. Adrian opened the car door immediately. "Dr. Carter." She turned, startled. Rain poured heavily between them. Adrian gestured toward the car. "The roads are dangerous. Get in." "I'm fine." Another ambulance screamed past. Traffic barely moved. Adrian looked toward the hospital. "You'll get there faster with me." Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her not to depend on strangers. But another emergency call echoed faintly from her phone. Time mattered. She got in. The car pulled into traffic immediately. For several moments, neither spoke. Rain battered the windows violently. Finally, Adrian glanced sideways. "You went back." Evelyn stared ahead. "A teenager's dying. You still hate that hospital." "Yes. But you still showed up." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Patients aren't administration." Adrian nodded once. That answer told him everything about her. Most people eventually became cynical after enough betrayal. Evelyn somehow hadn't. That was rare. Dangerously rare. The car stopped beneath the emergency entrance. Doctors immediately rushed forward with umbrellas. Evelyn reached for the door handle, then paused unexpectedly. "You didn't have to stop." Adrian looked at her calmly. "Neither did you." For the briefest moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Not attraction yet. Something deeper. Two people who understood exhaustion in ways most never would. Evelyn exited the car and disappeared into the storm of hospital chaos. Adrian watched her go, then slowly leaned back against the seat. His driver glanced into the mirror carefully. "Sir." Adrian kept looking toward the hospital entrance. "Wait here. Are we expecting someone?" Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the doors. "No." But strangely, he stayed anyway. 6 hours later, dawn light slowly crept across the city skyline. Adrian still sat inside the parked car. His untouched coffee had gone cold hours ago. Finally, the hospital doors opened. Evelyn stepped outside wearing wrinkled scrubs beneath her coat. Completely exhausted, a streak of dried blood remained near her wrist. Yet somehow she still walked with controlled composure. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the car still there. Adrian lowered the window slightly. "You stayed." He looked mildly confused by the question. "You looked too tired to argue for another ride." For the first time in days, Evelyn laughed. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. Brief. Soft. Human. And Adrian realized something dangerous immediately. He wanted to hear it again. Evelyn entered the car slowly. The city outside remained quiet in early dawn light. Neither spoke for almost a minute. Then Evelyn leaned her head back against the seat. "The girl survived." Adrian nodded once. "I figured she would." She looked sideways at him. "That confident? You don't seem like someone who loses often." Evelyn stared at him carefully. Most people called her talented, gifted, brilliant. Adrian's wording felt different, like he recognized the cost behind competence. She looked out the window quietly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "The hospital administrators are probably preparing another lecture about teamwork right now." Adrian's mouth curved faintly. "And yet they still needed you." Evelyn's expression darkened slightly. "That's the problem. The car stopped outside her apartment building. Morning sunlight now painted the streets gold. Evelyn reached for the door handle again, then paused. You should probably stop rescuing exhausted surgeons during thunderstorms. Adrian looked at her evenly. You should probably stop saving institutions that don't deserve you. For a second, neither moved. Then Evelyn stepped out. But before closing the door, she looked back once. Good night. Or good morning, I guess. Adrian watched her disappear inside the building. And for the first time since his marriage collapsed, the loneliness felt a little less absolute. By Monday morning, the city was on fire with rumors. Not literal fire, the far more dangerous kind. Corporate leaks, government investigations, hospital scandals, executive affairs, financial crimes. Every elite circle in the city suddenly felt unstable. And standing quietly at the center of it all were two people who had finally stopped allowing themselves to be used. At 8:30 a.m., Adrian Vale entered the Nexera Dynamics boardroom carrying nothing but a black folder and a cup of coffee. 12 board members waited inside. Several avoided eye contact immediately. Others looked openly irritated. Chairman Leonard Graves folded his hands. We'll begin directly. Adrian sat calmly. Leonard continued. Your recent personal controversies have created instability. Adrian sipped his coffee. Revenue increased 12% this quarter. That's not the point. No, Adrian agreed quietly. The point is certain people became uncomfortable after I started removing corruption. A few faces shifted subtly. There it was. Fear. Adrian opened the black folder slowly. Inside were financial records, wire transfers, private shell corporations, illegal kickbacks. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Leonard's expression hardened. What exactly is this? Adrian slid the documents across the table. Evidence. Silence. One board member stood abruptly. You investigated us? Adrian looked almost bored. You investigated yourselves. I simply organized the information. Another director snapped angrily. You can't threaten the board. Adrian leaned back calmly. I'm not threatening anyone. He tapped the documents once. I'm deciding whether this stays internal or reaches federal investigators. Nobody spoke, because every person in that room understood the truth. Adrian Vale had spent years building Nexera into a billion-dollar empire. If he chose war, he would win. Leonard stared coldly. What do you want? Adrian's answer came instantly. Resignations. The room erupted. You're insane. This company collapses without us. You think investors will trust you after your public divorce disaster? Adrian finally smiled slightly. Cold. Sharp. You're confusing yourselves with irreplaceable people. That line hit harder than shouting ever could. Because deep down, every executive there knew he was right. Adrian stood slowly. You have until noon. Then he walked out. No dramatic exit. No raised voice. Just complete control. And somehow, that frightened them most. Across the city, Mercy General Hospital faced its own reckoning. News vans crowded outside. Protesters gathered near the entrance. Doctors whispered nervously through hallways. And inside the administrative conference room, Director Harold Lawson looked exhausted for the first time in years. Government auditors sat across from him reviewing files. One investigator adjusted his glasses. These expense records don't match procurement reports. Lawson forced a smile. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Another investigator spoke flatly. $37 million doesn't disappear through misunderstanding. The room went silent. Nearby, Wesley Dunn looked visibly pale. Sweat clung to his forehead. Because unlike Lawson, Wesley lacked composure under pressure. Then the doors opened. Evelyn Carter walked in wearing dark blue scrubs beneath a charcoal coat. Every conversation stopped immediately. One investigator looked up. Dr. Carter. Evelyn nodded politely. You requested my testimony. Lawson's face darkened instantly. You went to investigators? Evelyn looked at him calmly. No. Then after a small pause, But I also didn't protect you. That silence landed brutally, because everyone suddenly realized something. The hospital administration had spent years assuming Evelyn would always clean up their messes, protect the hospital's reputation, absorb the pressure, stay silent. But that version of her no longer existed. The lead investigator opened a folder. We received anonymous documentation detailing illegal supplier contracts and administrative bonus manipulation. Wesley suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. The investigator looked at him directly. Sit down. Wesley slowly sat again. Evelyn remained calm throughout all of it. Not vindictive, not emotional, just finished. And somehow that made her even more intimidating. Lawson pointed toward her angrily. You're enjoying this? Evelyn's expression didn't change. No. She looked around the room quietly. I'm mourning how many good doctors burned out while people like you treated healthcare like a business game. Nobody answered, because there was no defense for that. 3 days later, everything collapsed. 3 Nexra board members resigned before federal investigations began. 2 were arrested. Financial news channels exploded with coverage about Adrian Vale's internal purge. Some called him ruthless. Others called him brilliant. Stock prices initially dropped, then surged once investors realized corruption was actually being removed. Meanwhile, Mercy General's scandal became national news. Director Lawson resigned publicly. Wesley Dunn was taken into custody for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal kickback operations. Multiple administrators disappeared almost overnight. And through all the chaos, Evelyn Carter received hundreds of job offers. Private hospitals, international medical centers, research institutions, everywhere wanted her. She rejected all of them, because for the first time, she finally had leverage, and she intended to use it properly. 1 month later, the Starlight Foundation Charity Gala glittered beneath golden chandeliers and soft orchestral music. The city's elite filled the ballroom again. But this time, the atmosphere felt different, less arrogant, more careful, because recent events had reminded everyone that power could shift very quickly. Near the balcony overlooking the skyline, Adrian Vale adjusted his cufflinks quietly while half listening to an investor discuss European expansion opportunities. Then he heard a familiar voice behind him. You always look like you're planning hostile takeovers. Adrian turned. Evelyn Carter stood there in a black evening dress so simple it somehow became impossible to ignore. Elegant, controlled, dangerous. Adrian's gaze lingered half a second too long. Evelyn noticed. She didn't seem bothered by it. You came, Adrian said. You sound surprised. I assumed you hated events like this. I do. She accepted a champagne glass from a passing waiter. But the Foundation's pediatric cardiac program saves lives. So here I am pretending to tolerate billionaires. Adrian laughed quietly. Again, real laughter. Rare enough that Evelyn noticed immediately. You're improving, she observed. At what? Looking human. Adrian raised an eyebrow. High praise. They moved toward the balcony together, escaping the louder crowd inside. City lights stretched endlessly beyond them. For a while, neither spoke. And strangely, the silence felt comfortable. Finally, Evelyn leaned lightly against the railing. Mercy General approved the reforms. Adrian looked at her. All of them. Independent compensation oversight, staff protection policies, mandatory overtime restrictions. A faint smile touched her lips. For once, administrators are terrified of doctors instead. You earned that. Evelyn studied him carefully. And you? Adrian loosened his tie slightly. The board's cleaner now. Cleaner. Mostly. She laughed softly. There's something deeply concerning about the way you say that. Adrian looked out across the skyline. You know what the strange part is? What? I thought removing toxic people would feel dramatic. And it mostly felt quiet. Evelyn nodded slowly. Yes, that word carried years inside it. Exhaustion, disappointment, relief, healing. Both of them understood. Because some endings weren't explosions. Sometimes they were simply the moment you stopped carrying what was killing you. Soft jazz drifted faintly through the ballroom behind them. Below, traffic lights shimmered across wet streets. The city kept moving, uncaring, endless. Evelyn turned slightly toward him. So what happens now, Adrian Vale? He looked at her for a moment before answering. For the first time in a very long while, his voice remained calm. I think I get to choose. Something unreadable flickered across Evelyn's face. Not fear, not hesitation, possibility. Then suddenly, a nervous young doctor approached the balcony entrance. Dr. Carter? Evelyn turned. The resident looked embarrassed. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. She blinked slightly. For what? The young man swallowed nervously. Half the surgical residents were planning to quit medicine before all this happened. His voice steadied. But after watching you stand up to administration, he smiled faintly. You reminded us why we became doctors. For the first time that evening, Evelyn looked genuinely caught off guard. The resident quickly apologized again and disappeared back into the crowd. Silence followed. Then Adrian spoke quietly beside her. That meant more to you than the promotions. Evelyn stared out at the city lights. Yes, because titles meant nothing if the system stayed rotten. But changing the future for people walking behind you? That mattered. Adrian watched her carefully. And in that moment he realized something simple. The most dangerous people in the world weren't the greedy ones. They were the exhausted good people who finally decided enough was enough. Evelyn exhaled softly. You know. She looked sideways at him. For someone terrifyingly rich, you're surprisingly tolerable. Adrian's mouth curved faintly. And for someone who threatens hospital executives for sport, you're surprisingly pleasant. A small laugh escaped her again. Warmer this time. Closer. Inside the ballroom, cameras flashed endlessly around powerful people pretending they controlled the world. But out on the balcony, two survivors stood quietly side by side. Not needing rescue. Not needing permission. No longer willing to destroy themselves just to keep broken systems comfortable. And for the first time in years, both of them finally felt free.